What happens when you don't just read thoughts but change them, edit memories, dial down emotions, or implant beliefs? This video is not just technical but personal, because when the brain becomes writable, who gets to hold the pen? As a neuroscientist with over a decade of experience, I found this video to be the most exciting to work on. And yet, it was the most terrifying chapter to explore. In part 1 of the series, we looked at the promise of brain chips. And in part 2, we broke down the science. And today we go one step further, into the world of bidirectional brain chips, where machines don't just read your thoughts, but they can rewrite them. We'll explore what that means for memory, emotion, and behavior, and the ethical boundaries that we are bound to cross. So stick around to find out how Obama, religions, and also military labs have to do with the future of your mind. Hi there, I'm Yvette, I'm a neuroscientist and an author of several neuroscience studies. But here on this channel, I like to go beyond the scientific facts. I break down how the brain works, decode its mysteries, but also explore the deeper questions that they raise about who we are, what we believe, and also how science can shape our future. So, if you're curious about this, I would just suggest to hit the subscribe button. And come on, let's think together. We often imagine brain chips as microphones, devices that read our thoughts or intentions. But in real life, communication is never a one-way street. And in fact, some implants are already being designed to speak back. And this is what it means when you hear about neurostimulation. So as a little recap how brain chips work, but of course if you want a detailed one, just go to this video over here. Brain chips are electronics that consist of electrodes, which are usually placed inside the brain, made out of some metal to pick up the electrical signals from the brain. This information is then relayed to an external computer, and trained algorithms try to make sense out of these electrical patterns, just to help them understand what the brain is saying. So now, in order for the brain chips to speak back, the reverse actions have to happen. The algorithms first figure out what electrical pattern translates to a particular thought, and then they relay this information to the brain. By sending these tiny electrical pulses through the electrodes, brain chips can activate specific neurons and circuitry. The most sci-fi example of all is brain-to-brain communication, and early experiments have already shown that it is possible. In 2013, researchers at Duke University have wired the brains of 2 rats together. When the first rat pressed the lever after seeing light, its brain activity was sent via the internet to a second rat, cueing the rat's brain to press the lever correctly without ever seeing the light. And so these results indicate that our brains can talk to each other by using technology, a real-life neuron-level telepathy. So why are we building this technology? Because most companies aren't doing this to rewrite your brain, although let's admit it, at least one is. But anyway, that's a story for another time. So with input comes reinforcement. It's the foundation of something deeper, which in neuroscience we like to call them as closed-loop systems, where the brain sends a command and it receives feedback in return. And in neuroscience, feedback is everything. Feedback isn't just convenience, it is how the brain rewires itself. It is how it can decide what connections are important and what connections aren't. So how is this technology being used right now? And what could this mean in the not so long-term future? And this we will discuss in the rest of the video. Back in 2016, President Obama shook hands with a prosthetic arm, controlled by a patient with a brain chip, that not only allowed the patient to control the hand, but also to feel his touch. And this was not the only case where a form of sensation was partially restored with a brain chip. Because in another study, a woman who was blind for 16 years had her visual cortex stimulated by a brain chip. And in doing so, she saw letters written in light in the canvas of her mind, bypassing completely the eyes, which is pretty amazing if you ask me, huh? And revolutionary studies like these are not limited to physical sensations. For example, in this study, scientists have recorded the brain patterns for a particular memory, and then they played it back. The result? A 35 to 37% memory recall. The study was done to help patients with memory loss, but it is also a proof of concept that memory editing in humans is doable. And if this is doable, our learning possibilities in the future are infinite.
I know Kung Fu.
But one can also imagine a future where we could also make brain chips to influence emotion. Deep brain stimulation, which is a technology right now that is not supported by brain chips, is already being used in clinics to treat severe non-treatable depression and also the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. In some clinical trials like this one-third of the patients with severe clinical depression went into remission after targeted electrical pulses, which is thought to have rebalanced the mood circuits. And if we can add it our memory, emotions and senses, which is practically our perceived reality, how would we actually recognize what is real and what is not? And questions like this is why I have opened up a few spots in my calendar to meet some of you directly. No further agendas than to just talk. And I have to admit, for me personally, I would love to meet my audience. These questions are something that I live for, and I'm sure that for some of you it is the case as well. And so I really would like to hear your take on this. We can chat about AI, neuroscience, philosophy, or just how all of this connects to life, your life. If this sounds like something that you would enjoy, there's a link in the description to grab a spot. And with that, let's continue. As a neuroscientist, I felt like a kid in a candy store while researching this video. What we can do today is already super incredible. And the possibilities for tomorrow are even more mind-bending. Imagine regulating emotions to abolish PTSD in war veterans. Manipulate vision circuitry to restore vision in blind patients. Or fitting a prosthesis that doesn't just move, but truly feels as part of you. And to be honest, who doesn't want that? But then I stumbled across something that made me pause. One of the studies that I reviewed today was funded by DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. And if you're like me and you don't know what it is the US Department of Defense agency responsible for developing breakthrough technologies. And needless to say, often with military applications. And suddenly, this became less of a medical miracle and more of a Black Mirror episode. That one where the soldiers' minds were manipulated in order to make killing easier on the psyche. Not so attractive now, right? But anyway, we don't need to go this dark. We can just take the capitalist route. And if you want it, you can have it for just $9.99 a month. A future where thoughts are shared like files, and joy or grief are dialed down or up like volume. Bad breakup? Gone. Lost someone? Taken care of. Need a dopamine hit? Just one tap. Feel like a failure? Ha! Not anymore, buddy. And sure, you might think, wouldn't a world without any negative emotion or pain be a good thing? But here's what I think. A world without pain does not mean that it's a world without suffering. I recently read a book called A Million Miles in 1,000 Years. And its core idea stuck with me. Because we all believe, or at least I do, that in order to live a better life, one should eliminate all discomfort. But often what makes a good life is to overcome these uncomfortable and also painful moments. Through difficulty we transform, and through struggle we grow. And this idea is not just some wishy-washy modern philosophy. It echoes through all major religions and philosophies. And if many of the great thinkers across many generations and continents came to this conclusion, don't you think that there might be a grain of truth in this? So now that we're here, tell me, if you had access to this technology, would you leave it for those who truly need it? Or would you try and soften the edges in your life? And if you did, in all honesty, do you think that you would be proud of the person you would have become?